Please, sir, just a few coins, anything at all. The voice was barely a whisper, thin as paper, worn down to almost nothing. Dominic Raines heard it through 3 inches of bulletproof glass and felt something in his chest crack open like old concrete giving way. He turned his head, and the world stopped. Because the trembling hands reaching toward his window, the bare, swollen feet on the frozen asphalt, the face destroyed by years of cold and hunger, that was his mother. That was Eleanor Raines, 83 years old, begging for coins in traffic, while he sat in an armored car worth more than most people's houses. If this story hits you somewhere deep, subscribe to this channel right now and follow every part to the end. And drop your city in the comments below. I want to see how far this story travels. Now let's go back to that red light on West Cermak Road, because what Dominic discovered next about his own brother would shatter everything he thought he knew about loyalty, love, and the price of staying away too long. The convoy had been moving for 11 minutes when the light turned red. 3 black SUVs in tight formation, rolling through the south side of Chicago on a bitter November evening. The kind of cold that gets inside your collar and stays there. In the middle vehicle, Dominic Raines sat with his left elbow resting against the door and his eyes on the street outside. His attorney, a compact, nervous man named Gerald, was still talking. Had been talking for the past 20 minutes about port terminal clauses and revenue projections and the importance of arriving on time to a meeting worth $240 million. Dominic had stopped listening somewhere around the Cermak intersection. Not because the deal wasn't important, it was. 2 years of negotiations, 6 months of groundwork before that, and a string of quiet, uncomfortable conversations with people whose names were never written down anywhere. The freight terminal deal was the biggest thing Dominic had ever reached for, and he was 20 minutes away from closing it. He just couldn't stop watching the street. There was something about the South Side in November that never left a man who grew up there. The way the cold settled into the brick. The way certain blocks had that particular quiet that wasn't peaceful. It was just empty of the things that used to fill it. He'd grown up 4 miles east of here. Different street, same weight in the air. Dominic, Gerald's voice sharpened. I need you to confirm you understand the liability clause on page 42, because if they push on that tonight, we cannot. I heard you. You didn't respond. Because I heard you the first time. Gerald pressed his lips together and went back to his papers. Marcus, in the driver's seat, kept his eyes forward and said nothing. He'd been driving Dominic for 9 years. He knew the difference between the silence that meant, think carefully about your next words, and the silence that meant, don't say anything at all. The light was red. The convoy stopped. That's when Dominic saw the woman. She came from between the stopped cars, moving slowly, hunched deeply forward, her coat so old and torn at the seams that it barely qualified as a coat anymore. She was moving with the deliberate, painful care of someone whose feet hurt badly enough that every step was a decision. Bare feet, on frozen asphalt, in November. He saw that first and it hit him like a fist. Then he saw the hands, thin, trembling, the knuckles swollen, stretched toward the driver's window of the car beside them. Tapping. The driver didn't look, rolled the window up. The woman shuffled to the next car. Same tap, same response. Nothing. Dominic watched her work her way between the vehicles toward his SUV. He watched the way her white hair moved in the wind, the way her head was bent, the way she favored her left foot slightly more than her right, and something was pulling at him, something low and instinctive and formless, the way a sound from another room can pull at you before you can identify what you're hearing. She reached his window. She tapped the bulletproof glass with 2 bent fingers. The sound was so faint he almost didn't hear it. Please, sir. The words came through muffled, but clear enough. Just a few coins, anything at all. Dominic looked at her face. He stopped breathing. The dirt, the deep lines, the 83 years of living carved into every feature. The swollen jaw, the cloudy eyes squinting at a tinted window she couldn't see through. All of that was there, and under all of that, underneath every layer of what the street had done to her, was the face he had first looked up at as a child lying in a crib in a two-room apartment on the South Side. The face that had bent over him every morning for the first 18 years of his life. The face that still lived in the single photograph he kept in the inside pocket of every jacket he owned. Eleanor Raines, his mother. The car behind them leaned on its horn. The light had gone green. Dominic didn't move, couldn't move. His hands were in his lap and they were shaking, and he was staring at his mother through bulletproof glass while she begged for coins in traffic and had no idea her son was sitting 3 feet away. "Boss," Marcus's voice was very careful. "Light's green." Eleanor shuffled away from Dominic's window, moved to the next car in the lane beside them, tapped again, head bent, white hair in the wind, bare feet on wet asphalt. "Drive," Dominic said. Marcus drove. The convoy rolled forward. Dominic turned in his seat and watched through the rear window until Eleanor was a small figure between the moving cars, growing smaller, still shuffling, still reaching toward windows that wouldn't open for her. "Boss," Marcus again, quiet. "You all right? You look like—" "Stop talking." The silence that followed was total. Gerald had gone completely still. Even his papers weren't moving anymore. He had been in the car with Dominic Raines for 4 years, and he had learned to read the silences, and this one was unlike anything he had encountered before. This wasn't business anger. This wasn't strategic calculation. This was something Gerald had no framework for. Dominic's hands were still shaking. He had wired $22,000 home every month for 16 years. He had bought his mother a house in Oak Park, 4 bedrooms, a garden, a quiet street in a quiet neighborhood, completely removed from anything that could touch her. He had routed the money through his brother Vincent, specifically because Vincent had stayed, because Vincent was there, because Dominic had left at 18 and Vincent had been 12. And Dominic had told himself for 16 years that the money and the house and the monthly messages from the number he believed was his mother's phone were enough. That they meant she was fine. That they meant he had taken care of her. He had sent money. He had sent a house. He had stayed away because in his world, a known family member was the most dangerous thing a man could have. A pressure point, a target, a weapon for anyone who wanted to reach him. Distance was protection. That was what he had told himself. So why was Eleanor Raines barefoot on West Cermak Road in 20-degree weather begging strangers for coins? He pulled out his phone and dialed Vincent. 1 ring, 2, 3, 4, then the line opened. "What do you want?" Not a question, flat, cold. The voice of a man who had been expecting a call and was tired of waiting for it. Dominic's jaw tightened. "Where's Mom, Vincent?" Silence on the line. A long silence. And then Vincent laughed. It was the ugliest sound Dominic had heard in a long time, and he had spent 16 years in rooms with very ugly sounds. This laugh came from somewhere rotten, somewhere that had been rotting for a while. "You suddenly care now?" Vincent said. "After 16 years? You suddenly want to know where Mom is?" "Answer the question." "I'll answer it." Vincent's voice shifted. Something had dropped out of it, the performance of it, the rehearsed bitterness. And what was underneath was worse. Matter of fact. Tired. Like a man confessing to a priest who already knew. "The house in Oak Park? I sold it 3 years ago. Got $410,000 for it. Went through a broker in Elmhurst. Clean sale. No complications." Dominic's hand tightened around the phone. "The money you sent every month," Vincent continued. $22,000 a month, 16 years. You want to do that math? I did. It came out to $4,224,000, give or take. I spent it, most of it. What I didn't spend, I gambled. What I didn't gamble, I drank. She's been on the street for 3 years, Dominic. She's right where she belongs. On the street, begging, just like she used to beg me to go find you, just like she begged you to come home, but you never did. The interior of the SUV had gone absolutely silent. Gerald wasn't moving. Marcus had his eyes straight ahead and his hands very still on the wheel. Dominic's voice when it came out was so quiet that Marcus had to strain to hear it. You sold Mom's house. I did. You took the money I sent for her. Every dollar. She's our mother, Vincent. Each word came out separately, like stones being set down on a table. She's our mother. Don't. Vincent's voice cracked then, just slightly, the first real crack in the whole conversation. Don't you dare talk to me about her like I'm the villain here and you're the devoted son calling from across the country. You want to know what I watched for 18 years? I watched her sit by the door every single night. Every night, Dominic. Waiting. Listening to footsteps in the hallway, thinking it was you. I watched her waste away because you weren't there. I was there. I was right there beside her every day, and she still looked at the door waiting for you. So don't. Dominic said nothing for a moment, then, where does she sleep? Vincent was quiet. I don't know, maybe near Maxwell Street, maybe under one of the Bridgeport viaducts. I haven't seen her in months. You haven't seen her? No. She's your mother too. She stopped being mine, Vincent said, and his voice had gone cold again, the crack sealed over. The day she told me you were the good son, the strong one, the one who was going to come back and fix everything. I was standing right next to her when she said it. So, no, I stopped keeping track. The line went dead. Dominic lowered the phone from his ear slowly. He looked at it for a moment. Then he looked up at the road ahead. Cancel the meeting, he said. Gerald made a sound that wasn't quite a word. Gerald, Dominic turned his head. Cancel everything. The meeting, the call afterward, whatever else is on the schedule, cancel it. Dominic, this deal is 2 years of... If I have to say it twice, Dominic said very quietly, this will be the last conversation you and I ever have. Do you understand what I mean by that? Gerald understood. He picked up his own phone and started making calls. His hands were not entirely steady. Marcus! Dominic looked forward. Turn around. Go back to Cermak. Marcus turned the car around without a word. The other 2 SUVs followed immediately, as they always did. When Dominic gave an order, people did not ask for reasons. They went back to the intersection. Eleanor was gone. The light was green, the cars were moving, and the section of road where she had been shuffling between vehicles was empty. Dominic ordered a search. Marcus made calls. The 4 vehicles split into 4 directions across Bridgeport, sweeping every block in a grid. Dominic rode with the window down in 20-degree air, scanning every face on every sidewalk, every figure moving along the buildings, every shape hunched in a doorway. 30 minutes, 45, an hour. His phone kept ringing. Gerald, the investors, 3 different partners. He turned it face down and left it there. Marcus came back on the radio. Boss! Bridgeport overpass. West end of the viaduct. There's someone under there. Dominic said, stop the car, before Marcus had finished the sentence. He saw her from the road. Under the overpass, against a concrete support pillar, an old woman sat slumped with her head down and her white hair loose around her face. She was so still that for one terrible second Dominic thought she wasn't breathing. Then he saw the slight movement of her shoulders, and beside her, sitting close, one arm around the old woman's shoulders, was a young woman. Blonde hair tangled and unwashed, cheekbones sharp from hunger, her jacket thin and torn at the shoulder. The young woman was breaking a piece of bread carefully in half and lifting one piece to the old woman's mouth. With her free hand, she was pulling a frayed blanket, barely deserving the name, over Eleanor's legs. She herself was not wearing the blanket. She gave it to the old woman and sat in the cold. Dominic opened the car door. His leather shoes hit dirty ground. Marcus got out beside him, one hand moving inside his jacket. Two men from the rear vehicle joined them. They walked toward the underpass. The blonde woman heard them coming before she saw them. She was on her feet before the footsteps had fully registered, moving in front of Eleanor with the speed of someone who had done this before, who had drilled this response into muscle memory through repetition. She put herself between the old woman and the approaching men, feet planted, fists at her sides, chin up. She was thin enough that Dominic could see the angle of her collarbones through her jacket. She looked like she hadn't eaten a full meal in weeks. She was shaking slightly, probably from the cold. She did not back up 1 inch. "Stop right there." Her voice trembled, but there was iron in it, old iron, the kind that's been bent and heated and bent again and still holds. "I don't know who you are and I don't care. You don't touch her." Marcus took a step forward. Dominic raised his hand. "Stop." Marcus stopped. Dominic looked at the blonde woman standing between him and his mother. Starving, cold, one jacket in November, shaking with the effort of holding herself square against 5 men, and still not moving. He looked at her eyes, and something pulled at him again. The same formless thing he'd felt at the traffic light. Something beneath language. Something that recognized before the conscious mind caught up. He stepped around her. She grabbed his arm. He didn't stop. He kept walking. His eyes were already on Eleanor. He stopped a few feet away, his throat locked. He forced 2 words out through it. "Mama." Eleanor didn't move. Her head stayed down. "Mama," louder this time. She lifted her head slowly, the way a person lifts something heavy. Her eyes were clouded, adjusting to the low light under the bridge. She looked at him, the expensive suit, the hard face, the tattoos at his collar and on the back of his hands. She stared at him for a long time. Then her mouth opened. "Dominic." Her voice was dust and memory and 20 years of waiting packed into 3 syllables. "Is that you? Or am I dreaming again?" She had dreamed this particular dream so many times. He came back. She reached out. She woke up on pavement with her hands empty and the cold so deep it felt personal. She knew how this one ended. "I'm here, Mama." He took 1 more step. "I came back." She tried to stand. She pushed against the pillar with 1 hand, and her legs shook, and her knees buckled, and Dominic moved to catch her, and she slapped him. The crack of it under the bridge was like a gunshot. That gaunt hand, that hand that had laundered clothes on double shifts and braided his hair when he was 4, and pressed to the door every night for 18 years listening for footsteps. That hand struck Dominic Raines across the face with a force that stopped everyone under that overpass cold. Marcus's hand went inside his jacket by pure reflex. The 2 guards behind him stiffened. The blonde woman's breath stopped. Dominic raised his left hand behind him, palm open, flat. "Don't." Nobody moved. Eleanor struck him again on the other cheek. He stood there and took it. He didn't move his head. He didn't turn away. He just stood there with both sides of his face burning and let her hit him because she had earned every single blow, and he knew it. "You abandoned me." Her voice was shaking, but every word landed like something physical. "You left and you never came back. I waited for you, Dominic. I waited every day, every week, every year. 18 years. Do you have any idea how long 18 years is when you are waiting alone?" She hit him again, weaker this time, her hand trembling. "I sat by the door every single night. I heard footsteps in the hall and I thought..." Her voice broke and then hardened again. "I thought it was you. It was never you. Never. Not once." Dominic dropped to both knees. His $1,000 suit hit the filthy ground of the underpass, and he did not care. His knees were in dirt and broken glass, and he did not move. "I'm sorry, Mama." His voice came out strange. Not his voice. Not the voice his men knew. Not the voice that had closed deals and ended conversations and made entire rooms go quiet just by changing. This was something else entirely. Raw. Exposed. The voice of the 18-year-old boy who had walked away from this woman and carried it ever since. "I'm sorry. I am so sorry." Eleanor looked down at her son on his knees in the dirt. Her tears came silently, the way tears come when a person has cried so much and so long that the mechanism is just running on its own now, automatic, not connected to anything dramatic, just grief doing what grief does. "Sorry," she said. "Sorry doesn't give me back 18 years of my life. Sorry doesn't keep me warm when I was freezing. Sorry doesn't feed me when I was too hungry to stand up." Her voice dropped to something almost quiet, something almost worse than yelling. "I didn't need money, Dominic. I needed you. I needed to hear your voice, to know you were alive, to see your face. You sent money every month like I was a bill you paid and then forgot about. Like I was an expense. Like I was something you checked off a list." Dominic bowed his head. Tears dropped from his face onto the dirty ground. The most feared man in Chicago, on his knees under a bridge in Bridgeport, crying in front of his men, in front of a stranger, and he did not care about any of it, because she was right. Every word she had spoken was exactly and completely right. He had told himself for 16 years that the money was enough, that the house was enough, that providing for her from a safe distance was the responsible version of love. He had dressed cowardice up as protection and called it devotion, and made himself believe it because believing it was easier than coming home. He looked up at her. His eyes were destroyed. "Mama, I sent money, $22,000 a month, for 16 years. I bought you a house, 4 bedrooms, a garden. I sent everything through Vincent." Eleanor went very still. "What house?" she said. "Oak Park. I bought it." "Dominic." Her voice changed. The grief shifted, rearranged, and something worse moved into its place. "What money? What house? I never received any house. I never received a single dollar. There was no house. There was nothing." The cold that came over Dominic then had nothing to do with November. It started somewhere in his spine and spread outward, and his lungs felt like something had been pulled out of them. "Vincent," he said. Eleanor looked at him. He watched the comprehension arrive in her face, watched it move in slowly the way a poison moves, drop by drop, and he watched the moment it reached her understanding and her legs gave out. He caught her. He had her before she hit the ground. And he was terrified by how little she weighed. She felt hollow, like a body that had been spending itself for years and had nearly run out. "Not both of them," she whispered. Her voice had gone to almost nothing. "Not both my sons. You left. And Gianni betrayed me. What did I do wrong? Where did I go wrong that both of my children—" "You didn't do anything wrong." He held her tighter. "This is on me. I should have come back. I should have checked myself. I should have never trusted this to someone else. I don't care if he's my brother. This is my fault, Mama, not yours. None of this is yours." She trembled in his arms. Her shoulders moved in small, silent spasms. He had held her like this as a child during thunderstorms. This was the same woman, and now he was holding her under a bridge in the cold because he had built an empire and abandoned the only person who had ever mattered before any of the empire existed. The blonde woman stood a few feet away watching. She had lowered her fist somewhere in the middle of all of it. She was watching Dominic hold Eleanor, watching the old woman's shoulders shake, and her face held something complicated and unreadable. Then she looked at Dominic's face, full on for the first time. The dark eyes, the jaw, the way he held himself even now, even kneeling on filthy ground holding his mother. Something in her chest went sideways. A winter night, 19 years ago. She had been 9 years old. Her father had a bottle, and the bottle had gone into the wall near her head, and she'd pressed herself into the kitchen corner with her arms over her face. And then someone had stepped in front of her. A boy from the building, 18, broad shoulders, dark eyes. He'd shoved her father back. Her father went down, and the boy had scooped her up and carried her out of the apartment and down the stairs and out into the cold and set her down on a porch 2 buildings over and looked at her with those dark eyes and said, "Stay here. She'll keep you safe. I have to go." Then he was gone. She had never seen him again. Until now. "Dominic," she said, so quietly it was barely a sound. He turned. He looked at her. He looked past the thinness and the dirt and the years written into her face, and he found her eyes, and he recognized them the way you recognize something that was there before you knew what recognition was. "Callie," he said. Time stopped under the bridge. The 9-year-old girl he had carried out of a drunk man's apartment on a winter night 19 years ago was standing in front of him. She had grown up alone. She had gone into the system alone. She had aged out alone. She had ended up on the same streets his mother had ended up on. And she had found Eleanor, or Eleanor had found her, and she had spent 8 months going hungry so an old woman could eat. Marcus broke the silence first. "Boss," his voice was careful, "whatever you need." Dominic didn't answer immediately. He was still looking at Callie. She was looking back at him with the expression of someone who had been left behind too many times to know what to do with the fact that the first person who had ever protected her had just come back. He stood up slowly with Eleanor still in his arms. She was so light it made his jaw clench. He started walking toward the car. "The girl," Eleanor said suddenly against his shoulder, her voice thin but firm. "If she doesn't come, I'm not going." Dominic stopped, turned. Callie was still standing exactly where he'd left her, arms at her sides, chin up, not moving, watching them with the face of someone who was already preparing for the moment they drove away. "Get in the car, Callie," Dominic said. She didn't move. "I don't need charity. Maggie's safe now. I can take care of myself." Eleanor lifted her head from Dominic's shoulder and reached one thin arm toward her. "My girl, come here. I'm not going anywhere without you. Don't leave me now." Callie looked at Eleanor. Her jaw worked. Something moved across her face that she shut down before it could fully form. Then she walked to the car. Not because of Dominic, because of the old woman. She got in and sat beside Eleanor and took her hand and did not look at anything else. Marcus pulled out. The 3 black SUVs left Bridgeport and headed for River North. Dominic sat in the front and stared through the windshield and thought about 16 years of money wired into his brother's bank account. 16 years of messages from a phone that was never his mother's. 16 years of photographs of a woman he now understood had been a stranger hired to stand in a house before it sold. 16 years of believing a lie because he had trusted blood. And his mother had spent 3 of those years on the street. He picked up his phone, not to call Gerald, not to call the investors. He dialed Tommy, his head of security, and spoke for 90 seconds, giving 4 instructions in the flat, quiet voice that meant the matter was not up for discussion. Freeze Vincent's accounts. Pull every financial record going back 16 years. Triple the security at the estate effective immediately, and find out everything there was to find about what his brother had done with $4 million and 1 house in Oak Park. He put the phone in his pocket. Then he looked at his hands in his lap. The tattoos on his knuckles. The hands that had built an empire from nothing and protected it for 18 years with methods he would never describe to his mother. The hands that had sent wire transfers home every month and called it taking care of her. He thought about Eleanor tapping on a car window with 2 bent fingers. "Please, sir, just a few coins, anything at all." He stared at his hands for the rest of the drive and said nothing. The estate gates opened before Marcus had fully stopped the car. Dominic carried Eleanor through the front door, and the first thing she said when she crossed the threshold wasn't anything about the marble or the chandelier or the staircase. She said, "Put me down, I can stand." Her voice was weak, but the command in it was intact, and Dominic set her on her feet carefully, one hand staying at her elbow because her legs were still trembling. She stood. She pulled her torn coat tighter around herself, and she looked straight ahead with the dignity of a woman who had survived 3 winters on the street and was not going to be carried through her son's house like she was already dying. Callie stood 2 steps behind her, arms crossed, eyes moving across the room the way they moved across every unfamiliar space, mapping exits, reading the faces of the staff materializing from the hallways, calculating distances. Old habit. The kind of habit you build when every new space is a potential threat. Mrs. Hargrove appeared from the East Corridor, mid-50s, composed, the kind of woman who prided herself on managing unexpected situations without visible distress. She took one look at the 2 women standing on the marble floor, one 83, white-haired, bare feet cracked and swollen, wearing a coat held together by nothing but stubbornness, the other younger but gaunt, hair unwashed, jacket torn at the shoulder, and something crossed her face before she could stop it. Not quite contempt, just the micro-expression of a person adjusting their expectations downward. Dominic saw it. He walked to Mrs. Hargrove and stopped close enough that she had to look up at him. When he spoke, his voice was completely level. That was the thing people in his world understood about his voice. The quieter it got, the more serious the situation was, and right now it was very quiet. "This is my mother," he said. "You will prepare the best guest room. You will draw a hot bath. You will find clean clothes that fit her. You will call Dr. Raymond immediately and tell him I need him here within the hour. You will have food prepared, good food, whatever she wants." He paused. "And Mrs. Hargrove, if anyone in this house looks at my mother or my guest the way you just looked at them, that person will not be employed here by morning. Are we clear?" Mrs. Hargrove went the color of old paper. "Yes, sir, perfectly clear." "Good, go." She went. Dominic turned back to Eleanor. She was watching him. The expression on her face was one he couldn't quite read. Something between grief and a complicated species of pride, the kind a mother feels when she sees her son be powerful and is not sure whether to be grateful or terrified by it. Callie was still watching the room, still mapping it, still keeping herself at the edge of things, the way a person does when they've learned that being at the center means being a target. "Your room is next to my mother's," Dominic told her. She looked at him. "I'm not staying long. When Maggie's better, I'll leave." He didn't argue, he just nodded. Because he knew her well enough already, or knew what she'd become, to understand that arguing right now would accomplish nothing. She was here. That was enough for tonight. Dr. Raymond Cole arrived 47 minutes later, which was fast for a man who had a practice on Michigan Avenue and a second life that involved making house calls to a particular River North estate at odd hours without filing paperwork. He was gray-haired, careful, and had patched enough of Dominic's men, and Dominic himself, back together over the years to be unfazed by almost anything. He examined Eleanor in the guest room for 35 minutes while Dominic stood in the hallway outside the closed door and listened to the silence. Callie sat on the floor of the hallway, back against the wall, knees drawn up. She hadn't taken the chair that was 10 feet away. The floor was what she was used to. Dominic stood and she sat, and neither of them spoke for the entire 35 minutes. Raymond came out and closed the door behind him. His face was the face of a man choosing his words, because the unfiltered version would be too much. "How long has she been living outside?" he asked. "I don't know exactly. At least 3 years. Raymond nodded slowly. "Severe malnutrition, both feet infected. Left one is worse. There's a real gangrene risk if we don't treat it aggressively starting tonight. Her blood pressure is dangerously elevated, uncontrolled, been that way long enough to cause damage. She has unmanaged diabetes, and her heart..." He stopped. "Dominic, her heart has been under extended stress. Malnutrition, exposure, untreated infection, years of it. We're looking at early-stage heart failure. She needs constant care, medication, controlled nutrition, Complete rest. He paused. Some of the damage may be permanent. The hallway was very quiet. Do whatever she needs, Dominic said. Everything, whatever it costs. I'll write the prescriptions tonight and send a private nurse in the morning. But Dominic, Raymond hesitated, which he almost never did. You need to understand. Getting her physically stable is achievable. What 3 years on the street does to a person's mind, to the way they feel about the world, about themselves, that's a longer road. Dominic said nothing. Raymond left. Dominic stood in the hallway for a moment, looking at the closed door. Then he said without turning around, "Tell me about the last 8 months." Callie looked up at him. She considered him for a moment, measuring, deciding, and then she got up off the floor and said, "Come downstairs." They sat in his study, Callie in the chair across from his desk, neither of them having agreed to sit, both of them just having arrived there. She told him without preamble, without softening anything, the way a person tells a story when they've already decided that managing someone else's reaction isn't their job. She'd found Eleanor in an alley behind Maxwell Street Market, behind a dumpster, curled on the ground, unconscious, lips already turning blue. She'd thought for a full 30 seconds that the old woman was dead. She wasn't. Callie had dragged her out of the wind and covered her with every piece of clothing she had on her own body and held her until dawn and talked to her even though Eleanor couldn't hear, because sometimes that's the only thing you can do. Eleanor woke up near sunrise. The first thing she'd said was, "Sorry," apologizing for the inconvenience of almost dying in an alley next to a stranger. "Before she found me," Callie said, "she'd been robbed twice. First time they took the shoes she'd found in a donation bin. She walked barefoot for 6 days before she found another pair. Second time they took the bag of coins she'd spent the entire day collecting. Shoved her down on the sidewalk. She was on the ground all night because she couldn't get back up, and nobody stopped." She looked at Dominic directly. Not one person stopped. Dominic's jaw was working. He said nothing. "Last winter, the temperature dropped to -14 for 4 days straight. Every shelter in Bridgeport was full. We tried 3 of them. They turned us away from all 3. There's a ventilation grate on the south side of a building on Morgan Street. It runs warm air from the basement. We lay on that grate for 3 nights. It was just barely enough. She ran a fever for 5 days after that. I didn't have money for medicine." Callie paused. "I stole a box of Tylenol from the drugstore on 18th. That's the only time in my life I've ever stolen anything." She said it without defensiveness, just as a fact she wanted on the record. "I went hungry every day so she could eat," she continued, "not because I'm a good person, because she was 83 and her body couldn't handle hunger the way mine could. And because," she stopped, looked at her hands for a moment, then back up. "Because she looked at me. That's it. That's the whole reason. You have no idea what it means when you've been invisible for years, when people walk past you every day like you're part of the sidewalk, to have someone look at you and ask your name." She asked my name the first morning she woke up. I told her. She said it back to me like it meant something. I couldn't remember the last time anyone had said my name like it meant something. The study was very quiet. "She talked about you," Callie said, "every night. She never used your full name, just called you the one who went far away. She said you were smart, that you were strong, that you were going to come back. She said it every night like a prayer. I thought it was what grief does to a person after long enough. I thought she'd built you into something because the real version was easier to live without." She held his gaze. "I was wrong." Dominic looked at her. "Why are you telling me that?" "Because you should know she never stopped believing in you, even while she was sleeping on a ventilation grate in -14 degrees. She still believed you were going to come back." Callie's voice was flat, not cruel, just honest. "You should know what that cost her." She stood up. "That's everything I know. You know enough now." She walked out. Dominic sat alone in the study for a long time. The city lights came through the window. He didn't look at them. Then he picked up his phone and called Marcus. "I need the full picture on Vincent," he said. "Every account, every transaction, every dollar going back 16 years. I want to know where all of it went. I need it in 24 hours. "Understood." And Marcus, triple security on the estate tonight. More men at the gate, rotating shifts. Nobody learns my mother is here. Not a whisper. In my world, family is a pressure point. She cannot become one. "Already done, boss. 2 extra men at the perimeter since you came in." Dominic ended the call. He sat back. He pressed his fingers against his eyes. He thought about Eleanor tapping on his bulletproof window. He thought about Raymond's face when he'd said some of the damage may be permanent. He thought about Callie stealing a box of Tylenol and going hungry every day for 8 months so an 83-year-old woman could eat. He thought about himself sitting in a 3-piece suit in an armored car, watching his mother shuffle barefoot between lanes of traffic while Gerald talked about liability clauses. He stayed in the chair until 2 in the morning, then he went upstairs. Eleanor's room was dark except for the monitor Raymond had installed, its green light blinking softly, steady. The sound of her heartbeat turned into a small, regular pulse of light. Dominic pulled the chair close to the bed and sat down. She was asleep, her hands on the blanket, her white hair spread on the pillow, her breathing shallow but even. In the dim light, she looked smaller than she had under the bridge, fragile in a way the bridge hadn't shown him. Or maybe the bridge had shown him, and he hadn't let himself see it fully until now. He sat there and watched her breathe. She woke around 3. Her eyes opened, and she looked at the ceiling for a moment, confused, the confusion of someone whose body had learned to sleep lightly, because on the street, a deep sleeper didn't last long. Then she saw him, and she remembered where she was. "You're still here," she said. "I'm not going anywhere, Mama." She turned her head on the pillow and looked at him in the near dark. Those eyes, even clouded, even exhausted, had always been able to find what he was hiding. She'd had that particular ability since he was 7 years old, and she'd caught him lying about where he'd spent a Saturday afternoon, and he'd learned then that there was no version of deception that worked on Eleanor Raines. "Why did you leave?" she said. Not with anger. The anger had spent itself under the bridge. This was something older than anger. Just the question itself, bare and direct. The question she had been carrying for 18 years. "That's all I need to know, Dominic. Why did you go, and why didn't you come back?" He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, hands together. He looked at the floor for a moment, then he told her. He told her about being 18 and watching her come home from the laundry at midnight with her hands raw and her back ruined, and nothing left in her face but the determination to do it again the next day. He told her about the night he'd done the math on what she earned versus what they owed in rent, and realized there was no version of the future where it worked. He told her about leaving before sunrise so she wouldn't see him go, because he knew if she saw him go, she'd make him stay, and if she made him stay, he'd stay, and they'd both sink. He told her about Carmine, about the job that turned into a role, that turned into a position, that turned into an empire. About the point, about a year in, when he understood exactly what world he'd entered and exactly what leaving it would cost him. He told her that by then he was in too deep to walk out without a body bag. "And I didn't come back," he said, "because I was afraid. In my world, family is how they reach you. They find out you have a mother, she becomes a weapon. I told myself keeping my distance was protecting you. I told myself that was love." He stopped. He made himself say the rest of it. "I was wrong. The distance I thought was protecting you was the thing that almost killed you." Eleanor was quiet. The monitor blinked its steady green. Outside the window, Chicago was doing what Chicago does at 3 in the morning. Moving, breathing, never entirely still. "What kind of man are you, Dominic?" she asked. "Out there, what have you done?" He looked at her. He could have given her the cleaned-up version. He'd told the cleaned-up version of his own story so many times, it almost felt like the truth. But not to those eyes. Not in this room. Not at 3 in the morning with Raymond's words about permanent damage still sitting in his chest. "I'm not a good man, Mama," he said. "I've done things that if you knew the details, you wouldn't want to look at me again. I've hurt people. I've caused suffering. I've lived a life that costs other people things they didn't consent to losing." He held her gaze. "That's the truth." Eleanor looked at her son for a long time. Then she reached out and took his hand. Her small, thin fingers wrapped around his large, rough ones, the tattoos on his knuckles, the hands she didn't recognize anymore, and she held on. "I'm not asking what you do," she said. "I'm asking who you are. And you are my son. Whatever you've become out there, whatever you've done, you are still the boy I held the day you were born. That doesn't change. I don't know how to stop loving you. Believe me, I tried. 18 years of sitting by that door gave me plenty of time to try." The corners of her mouth moved. Not quite a smile, something more painful than a smile. "I couldn't do it." Dominic bowed his head until his forehead rested on her hand. His shoulders shook. He didn't make a sound. The most dangerous man in Chicago pressed his face against his mother's hand and came apart in the dark, and she stroked his hair the way she had when he was a child during thunderstorms, and they stayed like that for a long time without speaking, because there was nothing left to say that words were adequate for. After a while she said, "Promise me one thing." He lifted his head. His eyes were wrecked. "Don't kill Vincent." Everything in him clenched. He saw Eleanor's bare feet on the pavement. He saw Raymond's face. He saw the photograph in his jacket pocket. Eleanor smiling in a garden that someone else had been paid to stand in. He felt the weight of $4 million and 16 years of lies and 3 winters on the street pressing on his sternum like something that needed to be answered. "Mama, he's your brother." Her voice was quiet, but it was not soft. It was made of something harder than soft. "He's my son. Promise me, Dominic." He sat there with his jaw clenched and his hands wrapped around hers, and the anger running through him like current looking for ground. And he looked at her face, the face that had waited 18 years, the face that had survived 3 winters on the street and still was asking him to protect the person who had put her there. He didn't understand it. He wasn't sure he ever would. "I promise," he said, "I won't kill him, but he gives everything back. Every dollar. Everything." Eleanor closed her eyes. Her hand stayed in his. A few minutes later, her breathing slowed, and she was asleep again. Dominic sat in the chair and held her hand and didn't let go. At 7 in the morning, Marcus knocked twice on the study door downstairs and came in carrying a black leather briefcase. He set it on the desk and opened it and looked at Dominic across the files inside and said, "It's worse than you thought, boss." Dominic sat down and opened the first folder, and it was. The first folder was the wire transfers. 16 years of them, printed in columns, every transaction dated and traced to its destination. Marcus had used every resource available to pull this. Banking contacts, a forensic accountant who worked exclusively for Dominic's operation, and 2 sets of eyes inside the financial institutions that had processed the transfers. It had taken 24 hours, and it was thorough. $4,224,000, sent in good faith. Every dollar of it redirected before it ever reached Eleanor. Dominic turned pages without speaking. Marcus stood across the desk and walked him through it in the steady, neutral voice of a man delivering a report, because that was what the situation required, and Marcus understood what the situation required. $1.4 million into 3 casinos over the course of 12 years. Rivers Casino in Des Plaines had Vincent's name in their system as a premium player. The kind of designation that comes with a dedicated host and a private room and a line of credit that someone with Vincent's actual income had no business holding. He'd lost more than he'd won, which was the most predictable sentence in the entire file. 900,000 on the apartment, the furniture, the car he'd bought and sold, the clothes, the restaurants, the kind of life a man builds when he's trying to feel like the version of himself he believes he deserves to be. The version with the cream leather sofa and the good wine and the granite countertops. The rest in cash withdrawals that disappeared into whatever a bitter, guilty man does with cash when he's trying to outrun the image of his mother's face. "There's more," Marcus said. He pulled out a separate stack of papers and laid them on the desk. "These are the text messages, the ones sent from the number he gave you as your mother's." Dominic looked at them. He recognized them. He had read some of these messages hundreds of times. He had kept some of them. He had screenshot one of them, the one where she'd said she was proud of him, and looked at it on nights when the life he'd chosen felt like too much weight to carry. "Mama's fine. The house is beautiful. She asks about you every day but understands you're busy. Take care of your health. I love you, my son." That number, Marcus said, was a prepaid phone Vincent purchased himself. Eleanor hasn't had a phone of any kind in at least 6 years. Every message you received over 16 years, every single one, was Vincent. Not her. She never wrote you a word. Dominic set the papers down. He sat very still, not because he was controlling himself, because the information was still landing, still moving through him the way something catastrophic moves. Not all at once, but in stages. Each stage worse than the one before it, the full weight of it arriving piece by piece so that the body has time to register each new level of damage. His mother had never told him she was proud of him. His mother had never said she understood he was busy. His mother had never sent him a single word in 16 years because his mother had no phone, had no house, and had no idea her son was sending money home every month, because the money had never reached her. And the photographs. Marcus placed them on the desk last. Dominic looked at them. He had kept copies of some of these too. Eleanor in the Oak Park garden, Eleanor at the front door, Eleanor on the sofa at Christmas with a blanket over her legs. He had looked at these photographs when he needed to believe that the choices he'd made were worth something. "The woman in those photographs," Marcus said, "is not your mother. Vincent hired her. We traced her. Her name is Patricia Malone. She's 68, Italian-American. She did 3 sessions in the house before it sold. He paid her in cash. He took the photographs all in the same week and then sent them to you spread out over years. Different seasons, different holidays. The same woman, the same house, all of it staged." Dominic looked at a photograph of Patricia Malone smiling in a garden, a blanket over her knees, her white hair soft in the light. He had looked at this photograph on a night 3 years ago when a deal had gone sideways and 2 of his men had been killed, and he had sat alone in this same study and looked at it and thought, "She's safe. She's warm. Whatever else is happening, she's safe." He stood up and grabbed the edge of the desk with both hands and flipped it. The oak desk, 200 pounds, solid, imported, went over with a sound like a car wreck. Papers flew. The lamp shattered on the floor. Marcus stepped back but didn't flinch because he had seen Dominic angry before. He had never seen this. This wasn't business. This was something that had no professional category. Dominic stood in the wreckage of his own office, breathing hard, his hands at his sides, his knuckles bleeding slightly where they caught the edge of the desk on the way over. He looked at the mess on the floor. He looked at the photographs of Patricia Malone scattered among the papers. He looked at 16 years of wire transfer records. Then he said, very quietly, "Get the car." Vincent opened the door in wrinkled pajamas, looking like a man who hadn't slept since the phone call 3 days ago, which was probably accurate. Dominic walked past him without waiting to be invited. He moved through the apartment slowly, taking in every detail: the leather sofa, the fully stocked refrigerator, the closet with designer coats and Italian shoes lined up in a row, the art on the walls, the whiskey shelf. He picked up a bottle, read the label, set it down. He opened the refrigerator. He looked at the imported cheese, the fresh fruit, the charcuterie arranged on the shelf like a photograph from a magazine. He closed it. Then he turned and looked at his brother. Vincent had pressed himself into the corner of the room. He was watching Dominic with the eyes of a man calculating odds and not liking the numbers. Marcus stood at the front door. Two men were in the hallway outside. Dominic walked toward his brother slowly. He stopped in front of him and spoke at normal volume, which was worse than yelling. $200 wine, he said. A $5,000 sofa. Designer clothes. A full refrigerator. $410,000 for the house. He looked directly into Vincent's eyes. And our mother begged on the street for 3 years. She almost froze to death last winter. She nearly lost both feet to infection. She weighed less than a child when I picked her up under that bridge. He stopped. Let that sit for exactly the length of time it needed to. I have every transaction, every dollar, every fake message, every photograph of a woman you hired to pretend to be her. Vincent opened his mouth. Dominic grabbed him by the front of his shirt, lifted him, and put him against the wall. The drywall cracked behind Vincent's shoulders. He choked. Marcus didn't move. This wasn't his moment to intervene, and he knew it. Dominic leaned in until there were only inches between them. You want to explain yourself. You want to tell me about being 12 years old and left behind, and how that justifies what you did to an 83-year-old woman who loved you. Go ahead. I'm listening. Vincent didn't speak. His hands were at his sides. He wasn't fighting. He wasn't begging. He was just looking at his brother with an expression that had collapsed all the way through anger and justification and reached something on the other side of all of it. Something that looked like a man who had been waiting for this exact moment for 3 years and was almost relieved it had finally arrived. Dominic released him. Vincent slid down the wall and hit the floor and stayed there. Sell it, Dominic said. The apartment, the furniture, the clothes, the bottles on that shelf, everything you own. Every piece of it goes back to her. It won't be enough. It will never be enough. But you will do it. He looked down at his brother on the floor. And if you don't, he let the silence finish the sentence because the silence was more effective than any specific threat. Then Vincent started to cry. Not quietly. He broke open, full, ugly, the kind of crying that has been pressurized for years and finally has nowhere left to go. He put his hands over his face and folded forward on the polished floor that his mother's stolen money had paid for, and sobbed in the broken, gasping way of a man who had no performance left in him. 3 years, he said through the crying. I haven't slept a full night in 3 years. Every time I close my eyes, I see her face. I drink to forget it. I can't forget it. I gamble to stop thinking about it. I can't stop thinking about it. He looked up at Dominic, face destroyed, eyes swollen. I know what I am. I know I don't deserve mercy. If you want to kill me, do it. Maybe that's the best thing you could do for me. Dominic looked at his brother on the floor, the 12-year-old boy he'd left behind, the man that boy had become, the wreckage both of them had made of the one person who had never deserved any of it. Mama still loves you, Dominic said. Vincent stopped crying. He looked up like he'd been hit. What? She still loves you. After everything. She made me promise not to kill you. Dominic's voice was flat, not warm, just stating facts. I don't understand it, but it's true. Vincent dropped his face back to the floor. His whole body shook. He cried the way the 12-year-old boy had probably needed to cry for 20 years. Dominic stood there and watched him and felt no satisfaction in it. Only the specific exhaustion of a man cleaning up a disaster that had been building for 18 years. Sell everything, he said, then call me. He walked out. That night, Dominic couldn't stay inside. He went to the garden at 1 in the morning, sat on the stone steps, and looked up at a sky with no stars because Chicago's lights drowned everything out above a certain brightness. He sat there with his hands on his knees and the cold pressing in from all sides, and thought about Raymond's words and his mother's weight in his arms, and the 16 years of wire transfers in the file on his destroyed desk. He heard the door open behind him, soft footsteps. Then Callie sat down on the step beside him without asking anything, which was very like her. She'd been in the house 3 days, and in those 3 days she had established a particular way of occupying space. Present but never intrusive, close but always leaving an exit, like a person who had learned that comfort was something you had to be able to withdraw from quickly when it turned on you. They sat without speaking for a while. "You're Mafia," she said finally, not accusatory, not afraid, just settling a fact she'd already concluded. "Yes," Dominic said. She nodded. "Have you killed people?" He looked out at the garden. "Yes." She absorbed that. "I'm not afraid of you," she said. "I've slept in places where one wrong move ended things. I've fought men twice my size over a piece of ground to sleep on. Fear stopped being useful to me a long time ago." She paused. "But I'm afraid for Maggie. She's in a Mafia boss's house. If your enemies find out she's here, nobody finds out she's here. I have men on every entrance, cameras on every approach. She is safer in this house than anywhere else in this city." "You can't promise that." "I just did." Callie turned her head and looked at him directly. "The last time you made me a promise," she said slowly, "you were 18 years old and you set me down on a porch in November and told me to stay there, that I'd be safe. And then you were gone for 19 years. She held his gaze. "I aged out of the foster system alone. I've been on the street for 4 years. I fought to keep alive, and I did it entirely by myself. So you'll understand why your promises don't land the way you mean them to." Each word was accurate. There was no cruelty in the delivery, just the flat, careful honesty of someone who had learned that calling things what they were was the only protection she had. Dominic said nothing, because there was nothing to say. She was right with a precision that went straight past argument into something more permanent. They sat there in the cold. He took his coat off and put it over her shoulders. She didn't push it away. She didn't thank him. She pulled it tighter around herself and kept looking forward, and they stayed like that until the sky began to shift from black toward the deep blue that comes just before dawn. 3 days later, at Eleanor's quiet request, Dominic called Vincent and told him their mother wanted to see him. He said the words and felt every one of them. Then he added, "If you make her cry, I will forget the promise I made her." He kept his voice calm when he said it. Calm was worse. Vincent arrived looking like 3 more years had been added to his face since the Wicker Park apartment. He stood at the garden door and looked at Eleanor sitting in the chair under the maple tree. Callie behind her, arms crossed, watching him with undisguised contempt. Dominic stood at the glass door and watched everything. Vincent went to his knees in the grass the moment he saw her. Both knees. His whole body going down. "Mama," he said, and his voice broke on the first syllable. "I'm sorry, there's nothing else I can say. I did the worst thing a person can do to someone who loved them. I took everything you had, and I left you on the street, and I told myself reasons for it, and every single reason was a lie I told because I was too weak and too bitter to face what I was doing." Eleanor looked at her youngest son kneeling in the grass. She didn't look angry. She looked like a woman who had spent a great deal of her life loving people who made it difficult and had made a certain peace with that. "Why, Vincent?" she said. Just that. Her voice was gentle, and it was devastating for being gentle. He told her. About watching her sit by the door every night waiting for Dominic. About the years of being the son who stayed, who was present, who was right there, and still never being the one she looked for. About the day he decided that if presence wasn't enough to earn her love, then absence was at least easier to bear. About the money arriving every month, and how taking it had started as taking what he felt he was owed, and turned into something he couldn't stop and couldn't justify and couldn't face. "I was right there," he said, and he was weeping now, fully, without cover. "Every day, I was right there beside you, and you still waited for him." Eleanor closed her eyes. Tears moved down her face. "I love both of my sons the same," she said. "I miss Dominic because he wasn't here. But that never meant I loved you less. You were my comfort. You were the one who made me laugh. You were the son who stayed, and I was grateful for that every single day, even if I didn't say it enough." She opened her eyes. "And you threw it away. And you left me on the street. And I almost died there, Vincent. I almost died on the street because of what you did." He bowed his head to the grass and shook. She reached out and touched the back of his head. One hand, gently, the way she'd done when he was a child and he'd fallen. He looked up at the feel of it. His face was completely undone. "I don't hate you," Eleanor said. "I wish I could. It would be simpler. But you are my son, and I love you, and I cannot unknow that no matter what you have done." She withdrew her hand. Her voice changed. Not hard exactly, but decided. Final in the way a door closing is final. But love is not the same as trust. And love is not the same as forgiveness without change. You have to become a better man, Vincent. Not for me, for yourself. Because the man you have been is destroying you from the inside, and I can see it on your face, and I am telling you it will kill you before anything else does. Vincent said nothing. He pressed his forehead to the grass. "Now go," Eleanor said. "I'm tired. Come back when you have something to show me." He stood slowly and walked back through the garden without looking at Dominic or Callie. Dominic stepped in front of him at the door. "One chance," Dominic said. "That's what she gave you. Don't waste it." Vincent nodded and left without a word. Dominic watched him go. He didn't know if his brother would change. He had seen too many men promise to change and not to be optimistic about it. But his mother had given Vincent something, and that something was hers to give, not Dominic's to take away. He turned back to the garden. Eleanor had her eyes closed in the chair, her face tipped slightly toward the weak November sun. Callie was crouching beside her, one hand over Eleanor's, not speaking, just there. Dominic's phone buzzed in his pocket. "Marcus," he answered. "Boss." Marcus's voice had the particular quality it got when the information was serious and needed to be delivered fast. "Castellano's people have been watching the estate. My source confirmed it 20 minutes ago. They know you pulled out of the port deal. They know you're distracted. I don't have specifics yet, but something is being planned. I don't like what I'm hearing." Dominic looked at Eleanor in the garden chair, at Callie's hand over hers. "Increase the patrol rotation," he said, his voice dropping to the register that meant no discussion. "Every shift cut to 6 hours. More men on the east wall. That's the blind spot. And nobody, Marcus, nobody leaves this property without a full escort. Not my mother, not Callie, not the staff. Nobody." "Understood." He ended the call and stood at the glass door looking out at the two women in the garden. The one who had given him life and nearly lost hers, waiting for him to come back. And the one who had kept her alive through 3 winters with nothing but her own body and will. The most dangerous man in Chicago looked at the two people who made him most afraid and understood with complete clarity that afraid was exactly the right thing to be. 2 weeks passed. The estate settled into a rhythm that nobody had designed, but everyone seemed to need. Eleanor woke every morning at 7, ate whatever Raymond's nutritional plan called for, which she complained about constantly, calling it rabbit food, and asking Mrs. Hargrove why a bowl of oatmeal had to look so aggressively healthy, and then spent the late mornings sitting in the common room with whoever would sit with her. She was getting stronger. The color in her face was real now, not the artificial flush of fever, but actual health returning to skin that had been starved of it for 3 years. Raymond came every other day and checked her feet, her pressure, her blood counts, In every visit, he said the same thing. Better, but careful. The heart damage was responding slowly to medication. Slowly was not the same as not at all. Callie moved through the estate like someone who hadn't fully committed to being there. She was helpful, practically, specifically helpful, the way a person is when they've lived without excess for so long that waste becomes physically uncomfortable. She reorganized the kitchen pantry on the third day without being asked, because the layout made no sense to anyone who actually cooked. She fixed a stuck window latch on the second floor with a butter knife and a piece of wire. She sat with Eleanor every afternoon and talked. Not deeply, not about anything that cost too much, just the ordinary talk of two people who had shared difficult ground and found each other on the other side of it. But every morning, Callie stood at the window of her room for a few minutes before coming down, as if she was recalculating the decision to stay. And every morning she came down anyway. Dominic watched all of this from whatever distance the day allowed. He had a way of being aware of where both of them were in the house without appearing to track them, which was a skill he developed in rooms where awareness was survival. He noted the morning window ritual. He noted the way Callie laughed when Eleanor said something sharp. A real laugh, short and unguarded, the kind that escaped before the person could decide whether to allow it. He noted the way Eleanor looked at Callie when Callie wasn't watching, with the particular expression of a woman who had found something she hadn't known she was looking for. He didn't talk to Callie much. When they were in the same room, there was a quality to the air that required careful navigation, something unresolved, 19 years old, sitting between them like a question neither had asked out loud yet. He let it sit there. He understood patience as a tactical instrument better than almost any other tool he owned. Then on a Tuesday morning, Eleanor told him she wanted to build something. They were in the garden. She had a cup of tea and she was looking at the middle distance the way she did when she'd been thinking about something for a while and had finally worked out how to say it. "I want to build a place," she said, "for people like me, old people with no one, people whose children stop coming, people sleeping on streets in the cold." She looked at him. "A real place, not a shelter. Shelters have rules and curfews, and you feel like you're being processed. I mean a home, warm beds, good food, a doctor, people who remember your name." She paused. "I know what those people need because I was one of them. Nobody understands that better than someone who's been there." Dominic looked at his mother, at the steadiness in her eyes, at the way she was holding the cup with both hands and not shaking. "I want you to run it," he said. She blinked. "Me? I'm an old woman. You're the only person qualified. You know what being forgotten feels like. You know what it costs. Nobody can tell those people they're seen the way you can, because you're not performing it. You actually know." Eleanor was quiet for a moment. Then the corner of her mouth moved. Small. Real. The first genuine smile he'd seen on her face since the bridge. "Then we do it," she said. "We give them what nobody gave me. We show them they matter." Dominic started moving on it within 48 hours. He found a former factory building in the West Loop, 4 stories, structurally sound, abandoned for 6 years, and bought it outright through one of his legitimate holding companies. He hired a crew to begin renovation that same week. Eleanor and Callie went to the building every day to walk the rooms and decide what they would become. Dominic went with them. The 3 of them moved through the empty floors while contractors worked around them, and Eleanor pointed at walls and said things like, "Warmer, more like a living room," and Callie pulled out a notebook and translated everything Eleanor said into practical measurements. Square footage per room, bathroom ratios per floor, kitchen capacity, storage requirements. She knew all of it instinctively because she'd lived on the other side of inadequate infrastructure for 4 years. "Personal lockers," Callie said one afternoon, standing in what would become the first-floor common room. She said it to Eleanor, not to Dominic, but he was listening. "In every room, individual ones with actual keys. On the street, your things get taken constantly. Having a locked space for your own belongings, even if it's small, It means something. It means what you have is yours. Bathroom locks, Eleanor added immediately. Every bathroom, from the inside. Privacy is the first thing you lose out there, and the last thing anyone thinks to give back. Dominic wrote it down. He wrote all of it down. And then he went to his contractor and added everything to the specs. And when the contractor asked about budget, Dominic said, "There isn't one." The contractor wrote it down without further comment. Vincent started showing up at the construction site on the fourth day of the build. Nobody had invited him, and nobody asked him to leave. He arrived early and did the hardest physical work, hauling material, pulling wire, scrubbing floors. And he didn't talk much, and he didn't ask for acknowledgement. He just worked. Dominic watched him and said nothing. His mother had given Vincent a direction, and Dominic was choosing, for her sake, to see where it led. Dominic also installed things at the building that Eleanor didn't know about. Cameras embedded in light fixtures, bulletproof glass on the first floor, motion sensors at every entrance, an emergency exit from the basement that came out into the alley behind the building. Marcus coordinated 2 security men on permanent rotation, dressed as maintenance workers, and ran shift changes through a schedule that looked completely ordinary from the outside. It was a charity. It was also a fortress. Those 2 things were not contradictory in Dominic's world. They were both just forms of protection, and protection was the only language he'd ever been fluent in. Callie noticed the tactical boots under the maintenance uniforms on the 3rd day of construction. She looked at Dominic across the room, and he held her gaze, and she looked away without saying anything. She understood. In Dominic's world, this was love with different vocabulary, and she had been in his world long enough now to understand the vocabulary. One evening when the crew had gone home, and the building was quiet except for the 2 of them checking the final room layouts, their hands touched when he passed her a measuring tape. Just fingers, briefly, skin against skin. They both pulled back. Neither spoke. But Dominic felt it for the rest of the evening, and he saw, when Callie turned away from him to mark something on her notebook, that her ears had gone red. He didn't say anything. He filed it somewhere careful and let it be. 3 weeks after construction began, Callie told him she was leaving. She came to his office and stood in front of his desk, which he had replaced, and told him calmly and directly that the center was close to ready, that Eleanor had everything she needed, that the work was in good hands. She said she'd done what she came here to do, and it was time to go back to her own life, such as it was. Dominic stood up. He walked around the desk until he was in front of her, close enough that she had to look up at him, and he said one word: "Stay." Callie looked at him. Something moved across her face that she locked down before it could form completely. "You know how that sounds," she said. "You're a mafia boss, and I'm a homeless woman, and this doesn't end well for anyone, least of all me." "Nothing in my life has ever ended well," he said. "Not once. I want to try." She looked at him for a long moment. Then she turned and walked out without answering. That night, Marcus told him she hadn't left the estate. She'd gone to her room, closed the door, and skipped dinner. But she hadn't gone. Dominic sat with that fact in his office and looked at the ceiling where her room was located directly above him, and understood that not leaving was its own kind of answer, even if it wasn't the one he'd asked for. Then on a Thursday morning, 2 weeks later, Callie left the estate to buy supplies for the center. She had a bodyguard, a man named Eddie who had worked perimeter security for 6 years and was reliable. They drove to a supply store in Westtown. Callie went inside. Eddie waited at the car. 20 minutes passed, then 30. Eddie went in to check. The store employee at the back said the young blonde woman had gone out the rear exit about 5 minutes earlier. The exit opened into a service alley. The alley was empty. Her phone was on the ground, screen shattered. Eddie called Marcus. Marcus called Dominic. The call lasted 4 seconds. "Boss, we have a problem. Callie's gone." The phone was on the ground. "I think it's Castellano's people." Dominic put the phone down on his desk with great care. He sat for a moment in the particular silence that precedes the kind of action that cannot be taken back. Then everything in him that had learned over 18 years how to be cold and methodical and completely effective went fully operational. He called Marcus back. Every man we have, every contact, every person who has ever been in debt to this organization, I want to know where she is before sunrise. His voice was level. It was the most frightening version of his voice, the one with nothing in it but direction. And Marcus, I'm going out myself. Marcus started to say something about the risks of Dominic being personally visible right now, with Castellano already watching the estate. Dominic ended the call. He went to every place Castellano's people used. The bar on Halstead where his crew drank on Thursday nights. The restaurant in Little Italy that ran clean out front and less clean in the back. The poker room above the dry cleaner on Taylor Street. He went to all of them with two men and asked the same question in the same quiet voice. Where is the girl? He was not loud. He didn't need to be loud. In every room he entered, the quality of the silence changed the moment he walked in. The way a room changes when the temperature drops suddenly and everyone feels it before they know why. At the poker room, the man running the table gave up an address in 40 seconds. A warehouse in Cicero, rented last month through a holding company that Marcus's people traced back to Castellano's operation in under 2 hours. 4 SUVs left the estate at 1 a.m. Dominic rode in the front beside Marcus. He didn't speak on the way there. He looked at the road ahead and felt the cold thing that lived in him, the thing he'd built over 18 years in rooms where weakness was fatal, running fully through his system. And for once, he didn't try to moderate it. He let it run. They stopped 200 meters from the warehouse. Marcus deployed 12 men in 3 teams, 4 on each side, 4 on the approach. Standard clearing formation, the kind of thing they'd done before, but Dominic always felt the specific weight of each time, because each time was its own event, and complacency was how men ended up in body bags. The first guard spotted movement and fired. Then everything happened fast. Gunfire, glass, men going down on both sides. Dominic moved through it with the practiced efficiency of someone who had been in rooms like this enough times that the fear had long since been metabolized into something more useful. He stepped over a man in the doorway. He kept moving. Marcus was a step behind him, covering angles, saying nothing. The last room. Steel door, padlock from outside. Dominic shot the lock and kicked the door, and it opened. Callie was on the concrete floor, wrists bound behind her back with plastic ties, tape across her mouth. One eye swollen nearly shut, the skin around it already darkening. Dried blood at the corner of her mouth. Her shirt was torn at the shoulder. She was sitting with her back against the wall and her chin up, and her eyes, when they found him in the doorway, were not afraid. They were furious. The same fury she'd had at 9 years old when her father raised his hand. The same fury she'd had under the bridge in Bridgeport, standing between 5 men in black suits. She was furious at herself for being in this position, for having been caught, for being in a room that required someone else to open the door. Dominic dropped to his knees in front of her. He pulled a folding knife from his jacket and cut the ties around her wrists. Carefully, the blade angled away from skin, moving slowly despite everything in him saying hurry. And when the plastic fell away, her wrists were swollen and raw, the skin broken in 2 places where the ties had bitten in. He peeled the tape from her mouth slowly, using his thumb to release the edge before pulling, because there was a way to do this that didn't hurt, and he knew it. She drew a long breath, looked at him. "I didn't need you to save me," she said. Her voice was cracked from the tape and the hours of keeping herself quiet, and it was still hard as anything he'd ever heard. "I know," he said, "but I needed to save you." Something broke in her face. Not completely, just enough. The anger didn't leave, but something underneath it gave way, and she fell into him, and he caught her and held her in the wrecked warehouse with the smell of gunpowder and cold concrete all around them, and didn't say another word because there were no words for what this was. Just two people from the same broken origin point holding each other in the dark. He brought her back to the estate just before 4 in the morning. Raymond was already there, called ahead, waiting in the living room with his bag open. He examined her thoroughly. Bruising, swelling, 2 cuts, no broken bones, no internal injuries. "She's strong," Raymond said. "She'll heal." Eleanor had not slept. She had sat on the living room sofa since Marcus's call, with her rosary in both hands and her eyes on the front door. And when that door opened and Callie walked through it, Eleanor stood on her recovering legs and walked to her and put both hands on Callie's bruised face and looked at her for a long moment. "My daughter," she said. Her voice broke clean in half on the second word. "My daughter, you're here. I'm here." Callie stopped. Nobody had used that word for her in 21 years. Her mother had walked out when she was 6, and the word had left with her, and Callie had spent 2 decades filling the space it had occupied with harder things. She stood in the foyer of Dominic Raines' house with her wrists bandaged and her eyes swollen and Eleanor's hands on her face, and she felt the wall come down. Not slowly, all at once. She folded into Eleanor and pressed her face against the old woman's shoulder and did not make a sound, but her shoulders shook, and Eleanor held her and rocked her slightly, the way a mother holds a child who has been frightened and will not admit it. Dominic stood in the hallway and watched them. He watched the girl who had fought 3 men to protect his mother fold completely in his mother's arms. He watched Callie's shoulders shake with the grief of 21 years of a word she'd never been allowed to have. He turned away and went to the kitchen and stood with his back against the counter and his eyes closed. He stayed there for a long time. Then he went back to his office and sat down and looked at the wall and understood with the precise, unambiguous clarity of a man who had just watched his 2 people get taken and nearly lost one of them, that the life he had been living was a debt that was coming due, that the next time Castellano reached for someone in this house, they would not use it as leverage. They would use it as a statement, and that he would not, could not, live in a world where Eleanor or Callie bore the cost of who he was. He needed to get out, not eventually, not on a timeline, now. He picked up his phone and called Marcus and asked him to come to the office in the morning. There was something they needed to talk about, something that couldn't wait and couldn't be done in a phone call. Marcus said, "Yes, boss," and there was something in his voice, a quality of readiness, of having anticipated this, that told Dominic his most trusted lieutenant had seen this conversation coming for a while and had already begun, in his careful and loyal way, to prepare for it. Dominic set the phone down. He looked at the ceiling above him, where Eleanor was sleeping in her room, and Callie was in the room beside hers. And he stayed there in the quiet and let the decision settle into the place where it needed to live, solid and irreversible, a weight that felt nothing like a burden. It felt like the first thing in 18 years he had done that was completely right. The conversation with Marcus lasted 40 minutes, and when it was over, Marcus sat back in his chair and said nothing for a long moment. Then he said, "I've been waiting for this conversation for about 6 months." He said it without judgment, just as a fact, the way Marcus delivered most facts. Dominic looked at him. "You're not surprised. You found your mother under a bridge and canceled a $200 million deal without blinking. No, boss, I'm not surprised." Marcus folded his hands on the desk. "I'll take it, everything. The routes, the contacts, the political relationships, the financial infrastructure. I'll run it right." He paused. "But you know what getting out actually costs. People don't let go of an empire quietly. Someone will see the transfer of power as an opportunity. I know. It has to be slow, invisible, months, not weeks. Any sudden movement, and Castellano's people, and 3 other operations watching this organization, will read it as weakness and come in hard before you're clear." "I know that too." Marcus nodded. Then we start tonight. What followed was the most dangerous thing Dominic had ever done in 18 years of dangerous things. And it was dangerous precisely because it looked like nothing from the outside. The gradual transfer of an empire is not dramatic. It is paperwork and phone calls and careful conversations in which nothing is said directly and everything is understood completely. It is months of sitting across tables from men who would kill you if they sensed what was actually happening, and performing normalcy with enough conviction that not one of them senses it. Dominic's attorney worked in parallel, running every dirty asset through layers of legitimate transaction: commercial real estate, construction investment, development funds. Each dollar washed through 3 or 4 clean structures until what came out the other side was legal, documented, and traceable to nothing that could put anyone in a federal building. Dominic attended every meeting Marcus required him to attend. He shook every hand. He made every phone call. He sat across from men he was quietly walking away from and looked them in the eye and gave them no reason to look closer. He did it for Eleanor. He did it for Callie. He did it for the version of himself that had knelt on dirty ground under a bridge in Bridgeport and understood for the first time what he had actually been protecting all these years and what he had actually been sacrificing for it. Eleanor's house opened its doors on a Tuesday morning in February. Eleanor had chosen the name herself, quietly, without ceremony, in the way she made most decisions now, directly, without needing anyone to approve it first. She said a home should have a mother's name on it, so it did. On the first day, 9 people came. They stood at the entrance with the particular hesitation of people who had been turned away from enough places that walking through a new door had become a physical act of courage. Eleanor met each of them herself. She took their hands. She asked their names. She looked them in the eye the way she had looked at Callie in an alley behind Maxwell Street Market 8 months earlier. Fully, without pity, without the performance of charity, and she told each of them the same thing. This is your home. You are safe now. Ruth arrived on the 3rd day, 73 years old, carrying a plastic bag with everything she owned, standing at the entrance, unable to make herself step inside. Eleanor went to her. She took both of Ruth's hands in hers and said, "Tell me your name." Ruth told her. Eleanor said it back, clearly, the way it deserved to be said. Ruth started to cry. She said her children had taken the house and told her she was too old to be useful and left her on the street. Eleanor pulled her into an embrace and said, "I know exactly what that feels like, and I am telling you it will never happen here." Ruth stayed. Within the month, she had started a small garden in the building's rear courtyard and was bringing Eleanor fresh-cut stems every morning with the pride of someone who had rediscovered that they were capable of making something grow. Walter arrived 2 weeks after Ruth. 76, a former literature professor, quiet, precise in his speech, devastated in a way that had nothing to do with the street and everything to do with the specific grief of a man who had lost everyone he loved and had no architecture left for continuing. He sat in the common room on his first evening, and Callie brought him tea and sat across from him and didn't try to fix anything, just stayed. And he talked for 2 hours about his wife and his children and the books he had loved, and somewhere in the middle of it, the tension in his shoulders released, and he looked like a man who had set something down that he'd been carrying alone for too long. Vincent ran the operations. He arrived every morning before the staff, opened the building, started the kitchen, knew every resident's name and their specific needs before the end of the first week. He remembered that Ruth took her tea without sugar, and that Walter couldn't sleep if the heat was above 68 degrees, and that an elderly man named George on the 3rd floor had nightmares on Wednesdays for reasons nobody knew, but that meant he needed someone to check on him Thursday mornings. He did all of this without being asked and without drawing attention to it. One afternoon, Walter found Vincent alone in the supply room, sitting on an overturned crate with his head in his hands, and Walter sat down beside him and asked what was wrong. Vincent told him everything, all of it: the money, The house, the fake messages, the photographs, the 3 years his mother had spent on the street because of choices he had made. He told it without softening any of it. Walter listened. He was quiet for a long time after Vincent finished. Then he said, "You don't forgive yourself. You carry it. And you let the weight of it make you careful, make you pay attention, make you stay when everything in you wants to run." He looked at Vincent. "That's not punishment. That's how you become the person she needed you to be all along." Vincent said nothing. He nodded. He went back to work. Dominic watched his brother from a distance over those months and said little, but he watched. And what he saw was a man dismantling himself down to the studs and rebuilding with different materials. He didn't know if it was enough. He didn't know if enough was a category that applied to what Vincent had done. But his mother had pointed Vincent in a direction, and Vincent was walking in it every day without stopping. And Dominic decided that was the most he could ask for, and perhaps the most Vincent could give. 6 months after Eleanor's house opened, Eleanor collapsed in the common room during breakfast. She was reaching for her tea when her hand shook and the cup fell, and she pressed both hands to her chest, and then she was on the floor, and Ruth was screaming, and Walter was on his knees beside her before anyone else had moved. Dominic got the call from Vincent while he was in a meeting. He walked out mid-sentence without looking back. At Northwestern Memorial, the doctor met him and Vincent in the hallway with a face that told them both before he opened his mouth. Acute cardiac event. The damage from the years on the street, the malnutrition, the exposure, the untreated infections, the extended trauma had been accumulating the entire time she'd been recovering, building pressure against a heart that had been too compromised for too long. She was stable, but the next 24 hours would tell them what they needed to know. Vincent sat in the plastic chair with his face in his hands and said it was his fault. Said she never would have had those 3 years on the street if not for him. Never would have had the damage, never would have had this, and it was his fault. All of it was his fault. His voice wasn't asking for contradiction. It was stating a fact he had decided to carry for the rest of his life. Dominic looked at his brother. "She's not gone yet," he said. "She's fighting. So are we." Callie arrived 20 minutes later. She came through the hospital entrance with her coat half on and her hair loose, and she stopped when she saw Dominic's face, and he said 2 words. "She's stable." And Callie nodded once and sat down in the chair beside Vincent and put her hand on his arm and stayed there. They waited 6 hours. 7. Dominic stood at the window. He hadn't prayed since he was a child, but somewhere around the 5th hour, he stood with his hands clenched at his sides and his eyes closed, and he said, quietly, with no performance in it, that he knew he had no standing to ask for anything, that he knew what he was and what he had done, but that she deserved to live, that she had done nothing but love people who made it hard and forgive people who made it worse. And if there was any justice in how the world was ordered, she deserved more time. He promised he was becoming someone different. He asked for more time. At hour 7, the doctor came out and said she was awake. Eleanor was sitting up slightly when they came in. She looked small among the machines, but her eyes were open and clear. And when she saw Dominic and Vincent and Callie come through the door together, something in her face settled. The particular settling of a woman who has been worried about something and can finally release it. She tried to pull the oxygen mask down. The doctor moved forward. Dominic signaled him to wait. "Life is short," Eleanor said, her voice thin but direct. "I wasted too many years being lonely and angry and waiting for things that weren't coming. These last months with all of you," she stopped, collected herself. "These have been the best months of my life. Don't waste time. Don't hold on to things that eat you. Love each other." She looked at each of them in turn. "Promise me." They promised her, all 3 of them. Then she looked around the room. "Where is Callie?" Callie was in the hallway. She had put herself there without deciding to, the old habit of believing that she stood outside the boundary of other people's important moments, that the family circle had an edge and she was on the outside of it. Dominic went to the hallway and found her sitting alone at the far end with her knees up and her eyes on the floor. "She's asking for you," he said. Callie started to shake her head. Dominic reached down and took her hand and pulled her to her feet. "Come inside," he said. "You are family. You have been from the beginning. Come inside." She came. When Eleanor saw her, she reached out and took her face in both hands. "My daughter," she said. "You are my daughter. Never think otherwise. Never stand outside a door that is yours to walk through." She held Callie's face. "You belong here. You have always belonged here." Callie pressed her hand over Eleanor's and squeezed, and could not speak, but did not need to, because Eleanor already knew. Eleanor recovered. She came home. She went back to the center 3 days after Raymond said she could, which was 7 days before he said she could. And when Dominic told her she needed rest, she looked at him with the same expression she'd used when he was 12, and had tried to convince her that skipping school one day wouldn't matter. He stopped arguing. 1 year later, Eleanor's house had 12 locations across 8 cities, hundreds of residents, hundreds of stories that had been heading toward cold endings and found warmth instead. Vincent ran the network with a discipline and care that nobody who had known him 3 years earlier would have recognized. Dominic managed the foundation's legitimate finances and said very little about it publicly, which was how he preferred things. On a Sunday in May, Dominic and Callie were married in the garden. Small, just family, residents from the center, Marcus and his wife, Ruth and Walter in the front seats. Callie wore a simple white dress and her blonde hair loose in the spring air, and stood barefoot in the grass of the garden, where Eleanor used to sit every afternoon with her tea. She looked at Dominic across the garden, and the expression on her face was one he had never seen on her before. Open, unguarded, certain, the face of a woman who had spent her entire life with her back to the wall and had finally, at the age of 28, turned around. In every Eleanor's house across the country, at the entrance, there is a photograph. An elderly woman with a warm face and steady eyes, and a smile that has seen everything and is still, despite everything, completely genuine. Beneath the photograph, in simple letters, are the words she said every morning to every person who walked through the door. "Love costs nothing, but it changes everything." It began with a red light on a crumbling street and an old woman's fingers tapping on bulletproof glass. It began with a son who could have driven on and didn't. It began with the smallest possible act of stopping. Just stopping, turning around, going back. And from that single act, thousands of people who had been forgotten found their way home. That is what love does when it finally stops being afraid of itself. It doesn't just save one person, it saves everyone they would have saved, and everyone those people save after that, in an unbroken chain of warmth that started on a freezing November street in Chicago when a Mafia boss looked through his window and recognized his mother's face. He stopped, he turned around, and everything changed.